ashes, we all fall dead. Darkness doesn't always arrive the way you expect it to. Sometimes it doesn't make a sound. On the night of June 9th, 1912, 8 people went to sleep in a quiet house in Villisca, Iowa. They never woke up. And to this day, no one has ever been held responsible. There are places that carry something other people can't quite name. Not haunted in the way stories like to tell it. Not with slamming doors and figures in mirrors. Something quieter than that. Something that settles into the air and stays. Long after every other reason to feel uneasy has been explained away. The house in Villisca is one of those places. What happened inside was brutal, contained, and unsolved. And what people experience inside it now, more than 100 years later, refuses to behave like a memory. It behaves like something still present, still moving, still aware. Tonight we follow both threads, the crime that was never solved, and the darkness that never left. This episode contains detailed accounts of violent crimes, the death of children, and paranormal experiences reported by multiple witnesses. It's intended for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is strongly advised. If you're new here, welcome to Chasing the Dark. And if this is the kind of story that finds you, follow Chasing the Dark wherever you get your favorite podcasts so you never miss what comes next. Share this episode if it stays with you, and if you're somewhere a review is possible, it means more than you know. Now, close your eyes, let the room settle around you, and follow my voice into the dark. This is the Villisca Axe Murders. To understand what happened in that house, really understand it, you have to understand where it happened. Because Villisca wasn't just a backdrop, it was a promise. In 1912, Villisca, Iowa sat quietly in Montgomery County, a small, tidy Midwestern town of about 2,500 people. The kind of place that believed deeply in itself, in its churches, its grain elevators, its neighbors who waved from porches and knew your name, your parents' names, and probably the names of your grandparents too. It was a railroad town, which meant it had a kind of pulse that smaller farming communities didn't always have. Goods moved through, people passed through. There was an industry, commerce, and a main street that carried the weight of a community that expected to keep growing. And underneath all of it, the kind of safety that comes from smallness, the kind that makes people lower their guard, not because they're naive, but because they have decades of evidence that nothing has ever come for them. That evidence made people comfortable. That comfort made the house on E Street possible. The Moores were not strangers to that comfort. Josiah Moore was 43 years old in 1912. He built something real in Villisca, a farm implement business, a reputation, a place in the community that people recognized and respected. He had the kind of standing in a small town that takes years to earn and comes with genuine weight. He'd earned it the hard way, For years, he'd worked for one of the most powerful men in town, selling farm machinery, learning the trade from the inside. Then he'd struck out on his own, opened his own implement dealership, took on the John Deere line, and started doing well enough that people noticed. In a small town, doing well enough that people notice is not always a safe thing like it sounds like. Hold on to that, because it matters later. Sarah Moore was 39. By all accounts, warm, organized, rooted in the church community that shapes so much of daily life in a town like Villisca. She was the kind of woman who knew her neighbor's business, but not out of nosiness, but because she was genuinely woven into the fabric of the place. She helped run things. She showed up. That Sunday, she'd been one of the people who organized the very event that filled the family's final evening. Josiah and Sarah had 4 children. Herman was 11, Mary Catherine was 10, Arthur Boyd was 7, and Paul Vernon was just 5. A full house, a busy one. The kind where the sound of small feet was constant, and the table at dinner was never quiet. The Stillinger girls, Lena 12 and Ina 8, were from a neighboring family, close enough to the Moores that an overnight stay was nothing unusual. It was Catherine Moore who had invited them, 2 girls of her own age and a little younger, asking their parents for permission to stay over after the evening's church program. The kind of small, ordinary request that gets granted on a warm summer Sunday without a second thought. 2 extra places set at the table. 2 extra set of small voices in the house that was already full of them. Nothing about that night was supposed to be different, and in many ways, it wasn't. The Children's Day program had been the centerpiece of the day, an annual end of Sunday school event at the local Presbyterian church. Sarah Moore was one of the people who coordinated it. It was the kind of small-town church event that drew almost everyone out. Families dressed up, children rehearsed for weeks. The whole congregation gathered in that particular way that made ordinary Sundays feel like something more. The Moores were there. Stillinger girls were there. The program ran the way those evenings do, a little longer than expected. Warm with community, the children wound up from performing, and the adults content in the way you are after a day like that went exactly as it should have. The program ended around 9:30, and then they walked home together. The Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls, arriving at the house on East 2nd Street, somewhere between 9:45 and 10 o'clock. The house was waiting, and as far as anyone in Villisca knew, that was the end of it. Just another Sunday. Just another night in a town where nothing happened. There are some places that don't feel empty, even when they should. It's not something you can point to right away. The house looked like any other, modest, quiet, settled into its place on the street like it belongs there. If you didn't know what happened, you'd pass by without a second thought. But if you stay long enough, something shifts, not around you, inside you. Like the silence isn't just silence. It's holding something, waiting, watching. The house itself wasn't anything exceptional to look at. A 2-story frame home, white, with a kind of straightforward Midwestern practicality that didn't waste much on decoration. A parlor and a downstairs bedroom on the ground floor. Upstairs, the parents' room, the children's room, and the small attic space above. A kitchen, a cellar below. On the evening of June 9th, the house was full. The children were put to bed upstairs. Josiah and Sarah retired to their room, and the two Cylinder girls were settled into the downstairs guest room, a small space set slightly apart from the rest of the sleeping household. Off the parlor, behind its own door, lights dimmed, doors closed. One by one, the noises of the day faded out. The house settled into the kind of quiet that feels safe, predictable, like nothing can reach you once you're inside. But sometime after that house went still, it wasn't empty in the way the family believed it was. Someone was already inside of it. It's one of those details that refuses to let go, that whoever was responsible may not have forced their way in during the darkest hours, but entered earlier, unnoticed, and simply waited for the house to fall asleep around them. In the attic, when investigators went up there afterward, they found 2 spent cigarette butts on the floor. 2 cigarettes, smoked by someone sitting in the dark, up above the family's heads while the house was empty, which raises the possibility that while the Moore family sat in church watching their children perform, while Sarah helped run the program she'd organized, while Josiah greeted neighbors, while Lena and Ina Cylinder were asking to stay the night, someone was already in the house, sitting in the dark, above their heads, waiting. Because the danger didn't break down a door, it was already inside. It didn't follow them home. It was waiting for them to arrive. Let's talk about exactly what happened, because you deserve the full truth of this night. And the truth, as always, is far worse than anything I could ever invent. After midnight, the house went fully still. The killer moved through the dark. He didn't need a lamp, not at first. He knew exactly where the rooms were. He knew where everyone was sleeping. And the weapon he used wasn't one he brought. Josiah kept an axe on the property, like any farmer would. So that's what the killer used. Josiah Moore's own axe. Imagine it with me. It's sometime after midnight on June 10th, 1912. The house on East 2nd Street is absolutely silent. 8 people are asleep under one roof. The killer goes upstairs first. The stairs in an old house like this one talk. They settle and creak under any weight at all. And yet no one downstairs, no one in the next room, was ever woken up by the sound of someone climbing them in the dark. To the master bedroom, where Josiah lies asleep beside his wife. This is the room that by morning would tell investigators the most and the worst, starting with the ceiling. There was a deep gouge that cut into it, not over the bed, but toward the center of the room. Picture what makes a mark like that. A man standing upright, drawing an axe back over his shoulders and up, so high that the blade bit into the plaster above him on the backswing before he brought it down. You don't get that mark from a frantic close quarters attack. You get it from someone who had a room full of swing and was in no hurry to bring it down. And Josiah was the only person in that house the killer chose to strike with the blade. Everyone else that night was killed with the blunt end, the flat iron pole on the back of the axe head, the part that crushes rather than cuts. A pole blow is a hammer. It caves. But for Josiah, the killer turned the weapon around and used the sharp edge. Once, then again, then again, then past the point of any purpose a killing requires. By the time the doctors counted, Josiah had taken more blows than anyone else under that roof. Somewhere around 30, the blade had opened his face and skull so completely that his eyes were gone. Not shut, gone. Destroyed in the wreckage of the wounds around them, to the point that the men who found him couldn't make out the features of a neighbor they'd once known for years. The pillow and the mattress beneath his head were saturated, soaked clean through, and that blood had already begun to thicken and set by the time anyone found him, which is how the first doctors fixed the hour of his death so close to midnight. The body had been there, cooling for hours. Beside him in the same bed lies Sarah Moore. She was struck with the blunt end, the way nearly everyone else would be. The blows came down on her where she lay. And here's where the record offers what looks like a small mercy, and where I have to be honest that I'm not sure I believe it, because there's no sign Sarah woke, no defensive wounds, no shifted blankets, no turn of the body that says she came up and out of sleep and understood. But Josiah was struck something like 30 times in that same bed, just inches from her. And I keep landing on the same question, and I can't answer it. How do you sleep through that? How does anyone stay asleep beside the person they love while he's being killed? That close, that violently, for that long. Maybe she truly never surfaced. Maybe she slipped from the sleep straight into death and never knew the difference. That's a merciful version, and I hope it's the true one. Or maybe, and this is the one that sits on your chest, somewhere in those 30 blows, Sarah opened her eyes in the dark and understood what was happening to her husband, and understood what was coming for her next. The evidence can't tell us which. So that's one more thing about this night we don't truly get to know. We only get to wonder. When he was finished there, the killer reached down and drew the sheets up both of their ruined faces, covering them, hid what he'd done from the empty room. Then he carried the axe to the next door. The children's room. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur Boyd, and Paul Vernon. 4 children, 1 room, all of them asleep. I'm not going to walk you through each of them one at a time, because the truth of this room is worse than that, and quieter than it. It's the sameness of it. The killer moved through that room with the blunt end of the axe and practiced the same rhythm he'd used on their mother, and not one of the 4 woke. Not one cried out. There's no evidence that any child in that room heard the thing that had already happened to their parents, just on the other side of the wall, or sensed the figure standing over the next bed, or had any warning at all before the night reached them. They went to sleep in a full, loud, ordinary house, and they simply never woke up in it. When the killer was done, he covered each of their faces too, the same gesture their parents had received. 4 more times, each child's sheets drawn up over their heads with a care that, depending on which investigator you asked, looked like a ritual, or shame, or a need to not be seen by what they'd left behind. And the ceiling here bore the same mark as the master bedroom. That same full upward arc, again struck in the center of the room. He had taken his time in here too. Then he went back downstairs. The guest room sat at the back of the first floor off the parlor, a small room set apart from the rest of the sleeping house, and tonight it held Lena Stillinger and her little sister Ina, two girls in one bed. And here's where the case stops letting you keep your distance, because of all 8 people in that house, only one of them we know for sure did not die in their sleep. Lena. When she was found, she wasn't laying where the others were. She was laying sideways across the bed, turned wrong, off the pillow, her body in a position no sleeping child settles into on their own. Her nightgown was disturbed. And I'll be plain about this, because rumor has dogged this case for a century. The doctors who examined Lena determined that she had not been sexually assaulted. Whatever the disorder of the room meant, it did not mean that. What it did mean, however, was in the wound on her forearm, a defensive wound, a single mark in that entire house made by a victim who saw it coming. Lena raised her arm, in the dark, against a grown figure with an axe. A 12-year-old girl put her arm up between herself and the blow. The oldest, most human reflex there is, and tried to save herself. And it changed nothing about what happened to her that night, but it tells us everything about what she lived in the seconds before. She was awake. She understood on some level a child should never have to understand exactly what was standing over her sister and coming for her next. 7 people in that house were spared the knowing. Lena wasn't. And that's the detail that has kept investigators and writers and ordinary people who only meant to read one article up at night for over 100 years. It wasn't the blood. It's the awareness. Ina, the little one, showed no sign of a struggle at all. Whatever woke her sister didn't reach her in time. Both girls were killed with the blunt end of the axe, the same way as the family upstairs. And both, when it was over, had their faces covered with their sheets. And the axe was left behind in the room, leaning against the wall, still bloody, partly wiped down as if the killer had started to clean it, and then for reasons no one can name, simply stopped. And beside it, a 4-pound slab of bacon taken from the icebox, just sitting there, propped against the wall next to the weapon that the killer had killed everybody in the house with. Not one person has ever adequately explained the bacon. It's one of the strangest small details in American crime, and it has never once made any sense at all. Eight people, every face covered, and the one who carried it out wasn't done yet, because before he left, investigators came to believe the killer went back in, back up the stairs, back into the master bedroom, back to Josiah and Sarah, and struck them again. Many who've studied this case believe this return trip is when the very worst of the damage to Josiah's face was done. The blows that destroyed his eyes, that rendered his features unrecognizable. He wasn't finishing something he'd interrupted. He was choosing to come back for reasons nobody's ever been able to explain. And then comes a part I've never been able to rationalize, no matter how hard I try. He stayed. He went to the kitchen. There was a basin of water there, and the water was bloody. He washed his hands. There was food left out, a plate that investigators would later argue over, unsure whether it had been there before or whether the killer had helped himself in a house full of the dead. He went through the drawers. He pulled clothes and linens out of the dressers and closets, not to take them, but to use them. He used them to cover every mirror in the house. He covered the glass panels in the entry doors. He drew the curtains tight against the windows. He sealed the house, the kerosene lamps, the kind with the tall glass chimneys to focus the flame, had their chimneys removed and set aside. The lamps were left burning low at the foot of the beds, as if he'd lit them himself so he could see exactly what he was doing. But why remove the chimneys? No one knows. It's one of those details this case is full of. It feels like it means something, and nobody can tell you exactly what. Then he took the house keys, and he locked the doors from the outside as he left, carrying the keys away with him, sealed from the inside by covered windows and mirrors and drawn curtains, sealed from the outside by a locked door, and in the first gray light before the dawn, on a quiet residential street in Villisca, Iowa, he walked away. Nobody saw him. Nobody heard a thing. And the house sat, locked, dark and silent, holding 8 people who would never move again. I want to stay on that axe for just one more moment, because the fact that it was Josiah's axe turned on his own family and on the 2 girls who had no part in any of this is the detail investigators have always found most significant, because it suggests one of 2 things: either extraordinary familiarity, someone who knew this family, this house, this property well enough to know exactly where a man keeps his axe, or something colder, the kind of calm that doesn't need to prepare, the kind of mind that simply finds what it needs wherever it lands and goes to work. Neither possibility is comforting, but that's the point. Morning in Villisca didn't arrive any differently that day. The sun came up the same way it always did, stretching slowly over the town. Rooftops, streets beginning to stir. Nothing in the air to suggest that anything had gone wrong just a few houses over. That's the unsettling part about nights like this. The world doesn't pause. It doesn't hesitate. It just keeps going. It was a neighbor who noticed first. Her name was Mary Peckman. She lived next door and knew the rhythm of the Moore household the way you would know the rhythm of anyone you lived beside for years. The chores that got done daily, the movement that started the day. That morning, around 7 o'clock, none of it came. The Moore children weren't out. The animals hadn't been tended to. The house just sat there, still, in a way that didn't fit anything she knew about the family. So she walked over and knocked on the door. No answer. She tried to open the door. It was locked. The door wouldn't open. So she did the small, ordinary things you do when something feels off, but you don't yet have a reason to be afraid. She let the Moore's chickens out, and she went and called Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Ross came, he knocked, he shouted, and he got the same silence Mary had gotten. But Ross had a key, so he let himself into the parlor while Mary waited on the porch. He opened the door to the downstairs guest room, and that's where it stopped being an ordinary morning, because that's the room where the Sillinger girls were. Rossmore took one look, backed out, and told Mary to call for the police officer, a man named Hank Horton. He didn't go further into the house. He didn't need to. Word spread quickly, but not loudly. Fragments at first. Confusion, then shock, then something deeper they couldn't put into words. When the house was searched, the full shape of it became clear. The entire Moore family, and both Stillinger girls, every one of them, killed where they slept. And the scene itself didn't behave the way people walking into it expected violence to behave. There was no wreckage, no overturned furniture, no sign of a struggle tearing through the rooms. It had been contained, carried out room by room, quietly enough that not one of the 8 people had the chance to raise an alarm that would reach the street. And then the details that made no practical sense. The covered mirrors, the covered door glass, the curtains drawn tight against a morning that was trying to get in. The faces covered, none of it helped anyone escape. None of it hid anything from the outside world. It just felt deliberate, in a way that was very hard to look at. And then came the failure that would define this case for the next 100 years. Because this was 1912, in a small Iowa town that had never faced anything remotely like this. There was no forensic team, no protocol for preserving a scene, no chain of custody, no one whose job it was to keep that house sealed until the right people could read it. So the house filled up. Neighbors came. The curiosity came. Reporters arrived faster than a real investigator did. And by some accounts, as many as 100 people moved through those rooms before the Villisca National Guard finally arrived around noon and put a cordon around the home. "100 people walking where the killer had walked, touching what the killer had touched. Some of them, by the accounts that survive, carrying pieces away with them, fragments of the scene taken as grim souvenirs before anyone in authority thought to stop it. Whatever evidence those rooms still held, whatever a trained investigator might have found in them, most of it was gone by lunchtime. The investigation was behind before it ever truly started, and it never caught up. The days that followed weren't quiet. A town like Villisca in 1912 had no experience containing a story like this. There was no modern media cycle, but there were newspapers, and those newspapers carried the Villisca murders far beyond Montgomery County. Within days, it was national news, and national attention brought a problem that would haunt the case from the start. Everyone had a theory. There were earnest efforts. The county brought its people in. The state sent detectives down from Des Moines, and eventually the town itself hired private investigators, agents from a national detective agency, because the official channels weren't moving fast enough for a community that needed an answer and needed it now. But more investigators didn't mean a better investigation. It only meant a collision. Different agencies chasing different theories, evidence handled and mishandled by people working at cross purposes. Suspects pursued by one group who had already been written off by another. Accusations that some of the hired investigators weren't gathering the truth so much as building toward a conclusion they'd already chosen. The investigation wasn't just slow, it was fractured. And a fractured investigation sitting on top of a crime scene that had 100 strangers already walking through it was never going to close cleanly. And the town changed. The thing about a community built on safety is that when a safety breaks, It doesn't break quietly. People didn't stop blocking their doors. They started locking them twice. Some started keeping weapons close. In the nights right after the murders, families gathered in together rather than sleep alone in their own homes, afraid that whatever had come for the Moors might not be finished. And there were whispers. The kind small towns do better than almost anywhere else, because in a place where everyone knows everyone, suspicion travels fast, and it doesn't always travel fairly. Neighbors eyed neighbors. Old grievances found new air. Men who'd been on the wrong side of a business deal or a quarrel were suddenly worth a second, longer look, because the awful logic of that scene pointed inward. Whoever did this knew the house, knew the family well enough to move through their home in the dark without waking them, without forcing a single door, which meant the killer might be someone they knew, someone they've waved to, someone they'd sat beside in church. That thought never fully left Villisca. Not for years. Maybe not ever. In the days and years that followed, the town didn't just grieve. It watched. And it wondered. And the same question circled over and over. Who could have done this and stayed unseen? Over the decades, the case produced a handful of names that never fully went away. Let's walk through them. The first name stayed close to home. Frank Fernando Jones. Frank was one of the most powerful men in Villisca, a state senator, a landowner, a man whose name carried real weight in Montgomery County. He wasn't someone you accuse lightly, and that protection, the kind that comes with his position, may well have shielded him from the scrutiny he'd otherwise have faced. But Frank had a history with Josiah Moore. Years earlier, Moore had worked for Jones, selling farm implements as a part of Jones's operation, carrying the John Deere line under Jones's name. And then Moore had left and gone into business for himself, taking that profitable line with him and competing directly with the man he used to work for. In a small town, that kind of move carries consequences that go well beyond a balance sheet. And there were darker whispers attached to it. Rumors of a personal betrayal. Talk of something between Josiah and a woman connected to the Joneses family. Nothing ever proven. Nothing that held up. But in a town where a rumor moved like water, it seeped into the edges of the case and stayed there. Frank was questioned, named repeatedly by people who felt the motive. Money and grievance and a wounded pride pointed straight at him. Some even believed that he hadn't done it himself, but paid someone to. But suspicion isn't proof. Nothing concrete ever placed Frank Jones or anyone else in his pay inside that house that night. His name, though, never really left the conversation. Then there's William Mansfield. His name carried something different, a pattern. Mansfield was a man with a violent reputation, and one of the private investigators on the case became convinced that the Villisca murders weren't isolated at all, that they belonged to a string of eerily similar axe killings that had struck families in their bed across several states. Blunt force attacks, whole families, contained scenes, covered windows or mirrors in some of them. The details were never identical, but they were close enough to raise a question that's genuinely hard to shake. What if the person who moved through the Moore house had done this before, somewhere else, to another family that also never saw it coming. That theory expands the fear beyond one town. It means the danger wasn't local, it was moving. The investigator who pushed through the Mansfield theory pushed it hard. Too hard, some said. The effort drew accusations of manufactured evidence and pressured witnesses of a man working backward from a conclusion he'd already reached. And in the end, it collapsed where it mattered the most. Mansfield had an alibi. Records reportedly placed him well away from Villisca, at work at the time of the killings. A grand jury looked at him and let him go. Another name, another theory, another thing that slipped. And then there was Reverend George Kelly, an English-born traveling minister, an odd, restless man who drifted through Iowa and the surrounding states. He left impressions wherever he went, and they weren't good ones. He had a history of mental illness and disturbing behavior. People had known him as a peeping Tom, and he made people uneasy. And he'd been in Villisca around the time of the murders. In fact, he left the town within hours of them. That alone might not have meant much, but his behavior afterward kept pulling him back into the story. He seemed fixated on the case. He wrote letters to investigators, to newspapers, circling the murders with the familiarity that unsettled the people who read them. Years later, in 1912, a grand jury finally indicted Kelly for the murder of Lena Stillinger, and under questioning, he confessed. He said God had spoken to him, that a voice had whispered words from Scripture in his ear that night. Suffer the little children to come unto me, and sent him into the house. But a confession isn't the same thing as a truth, because Kelly's account fell apart under its own weight. The story shifted, it changed, it didn't line up with the physical reality of the crime scene. And Kelly was a man whose mental state made his confession deeply unreliable. The kind of statement that can come from guilt, or can come from a fragile, suggestible mind cracking under pressure. He was tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury. 12 people who couldn't agree on whether the strange little preacher in that courtroom had truly walked through the Moore house with a borrowed axe. The second trial ended in acquittal. George Kelly walked out a free man, and the case walked back into the dark. That became the pattern over and over. A name would surface, a theory would build. For a moment, it felt like something was finally locking into place, and then it would slip. There was one more idea that investigators never really resolved, and it's the one that, in modern times, has gotten the most serious second look. The traveling killer. Not any one suspect, but the broader theory that the person responsible was a transient, someone with no permanent tie to Villisca at all. Someone who arrived quietly, did this, and left before dawn. The railroad gave that theory its own legs. Villisca was a railroad town. Strangers passed through constantly. The depot was a short walk from the Moore house. If the killer stepped onto a train before sunrise on June 10th, he was simply gone, beyond the reach of any tool 1912 had to find him. And in more recent years, researchers digging back through that era found something that stops you cold. An entire cluster of axe murders of sleeping families across many states in the years around 1912. A number of them near a rail line. Several sharing those same strange signatures. Covered faces, contained scenes, a weapon found at hand. Some who've studied that pattern have argued that the Villisca murders were never a local tragedy at all, that they were one stop on a much larger route committed by a killer who rode the rails from town to town and was never caught anywhere. It's a theory, it's not proof. But it's the kind of theory that once you've heard it, you can't quite put down. The deeper anyone goes, the less stable it all becomes. No clear entry, no clear exit, no reliable timeline, just fragments that never form a complete picture, no matter how you arrange them. The last serious investigative push faded in the early 1920s. The case went cold. The house, though, remained, holding everything that had happened inside it, while outside, the world slowly moved on. After the trials, after the detectives left, after the newspapers found other headlines and the country turned toward a war that was coming to swallow the world, Villisca was left alone with what it knew, which was nothing. No answer, no name, just a house on East 2nd Street and a community permanently altered by a single night it could never explain. The Moore house passed through a string of owners over the decades that followed. For long stretches, it was simply lived in. Ordinary families cycling through, some drawn by cheap rent, some only half aware of the full weight of where they were sleeping. In a town that small, everyone knew, but knowing and feeling are different things. And people made their own accommodations. Some didn't stay long. Stories circulated, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way small towns carry their histories in the spaces between conversations. A family that rented the place and left before the season turned. A tenant who moved out within the year and couldn't quite say why. Nothing that would hold up to scrutiny. Just a feeling that accumulated decade after decade that the house wasn't finished with what had happened inside it. By the back half of the 19th century, Villisca had become something larger than a local tragedy. True crime, before anyone called it that, had found the case. Books were written, researchers came, historians who specialized in unsolved crimes of the early 1900s sat in the archives, piecing together what the official record had left in fragments. The old names came back around. Jones, Mansfield, Kelly, each finding fresh advocates and fresh critics in every generation that revisited the evidence. And the honest conclusion was always the same one the original investigators reached. We don't know. We've never known. Then in 1994, the house was bought by Darwin and Martha Lynn. Their intention was preservation. They restored the home as closely as they could to its 1912 condition, stripping away the modern updates, taking it back to the house the Moores would have recognized, and opened it as a historic site. And that decision changed everything about how the world related to this place. Because the house didn't just become accessible, it became a place people sought out, not only historians, not only true crime enthusiasts, but people drawn to rooms where the irreversible had happened, people who wanted to stand inside them, to feel what the walls held, people who came to look for what no historical record could give them, something the house itself seemed willing to offer. For a long time after the murders, the house sat in a kind of uneasy stillness, not abandoned the way people imagine, just closed off, watched from a distance, avoided by people who couldn't always say why they were avoiding it. At first, What lingered there wasn't described as anything supernatural. It was described as a feeling. People who had reason to step inside in the years that followed noticed it, even if they each found different words for it. A weight in the air. Not grief, exactly. Something less defined. And it didn't seem to belong to any one person. It lived in the quiet, in how sound didn't quite carry right, in how some rooms were just harder to stay in than others, even when nothing about them looked any different. Then smaller things began that didn't fit so neatly into just a feeling. Not all at once. Never all at once. A door that didn't stay where it was left. Just opened slightly when it hadn't been. Footsteps that didn't match anyone present. Soft. Faint. The kind you question even as you're hearing them. Pockets of cold air that didn't match the weather and didn't stay long enough to blame it on a draft. Individually, none of it proved anything, but together, it became harder to ignore. There's one report that comes up again and again, not from one person, not from one night. The sense of being watched, not overwhelming, and not the kind that sends you running. Something quieter than that. A feeling that settles in slowly, almost gently, until you realize you're no longer alone in the way you thought you were. People describe it differently. Some feel it as a presence just out of view, behind them, just past the edge of where they can turn and look in time. Others tied to a particular place, the hallway, the doorways, the thresholds between one room and the next. The common thread was never what they saw. It was always what they felt. Over time, fewer people were willing to stay inside for long, not because of any one thing they could point to, but because of how it felt to be there. The house didn't behave the way an empty house should. It felt occupied, not active, exactly, not moving room to room, more like the place was holding on to something that hadn't settled, something that hasn't left. When the house opened to the public, it didn't take long for different kinds of investigators to arrive. Paranormal researchers, ghost hunters, people carrying equipment the original detectives could never have imagined. EMF readers, digital recorders, thermal cameras, motion sensors set in every room where no living person was standing. And what they reported finding was consistent enough to be hard to wave away. The children's room upstairs drew particular attention. Group after group, over visit after visit, reported spikes in electromagnetic readings in that room at certain hours of the night. Not consistent, not the steady hum you'd get from faulty wiring. Intermittent. There, and then gone, and then there again. As though something arrived and departed, and arrived once more. Recordings made in that room captured sounds that people holding the equipment couldn't account for. Not always words, more often the quality of a voice without the shape of language. Faint, right at the edge of what the machine could hold. And more than one team came away saying they'd captured something that sounded like children laughing. And it isn't only laughter. Among the recordings people have pulled out of that house over the years, one comes up again and again. A small voice, thin and close, that resolves into one single word. Mama. Just that, a child's voice in an empty room, asking for a mother who's been gone for more than 100 years. The parents' bedroom was different, heavier, less like the lighter qualities some researchers associate with the presence of children, and more like intent, aware. People described in that room a feeling of being assessed, not watched idly, watched the way you're watched by whatever is deciding what to make of you. One investigator, a man who'd spent years in reportedly haunted places and considered himself long past being rattled, reportedly left that room twice in one single night, not because of anything he could name, just because he couldn't stay. He went back both times. The work mattered more than the unease. But he noted afterward that the second time he entered, it felt different. It felt, he said, like the room had been expecting him. The downstairs guest room, where Lena and Ina slept, drew the most careful, most tentative descriptions of all. Something softer, people said, but not in a comforting way. Younger, a confusion almost, like a child who didn't fully understand what had happened to it. Still, in some sense, caught in that moment, still waiting for morning, still not knowing it would never come. And there's one account from that downstairs room that's harder to shake than the rest. The caretakers sometimes call it the dark room. The parlor room where Lena and Ina were found. More than one visitor has reported seeing a child there, low to the floor, seeming to play with someone no one else could see, reaching under the bed, laughing at something in the dark beneath it. These reports are consistent across years, across different groups, with different equipment and entirely different frameworks for making sense of what they felt. The children's room gives back the sound of children. The parents' room, a presence that feels aware. The guest room, something younger, soft, confused. And the shape of those reports maps closely onto where each of those people slept on the night of June 9th, 1912. Closely enough that it's hard to call coincidence. Closely enough to ask a question that has no comfortable answer. What if what the people feel in that house isn't random? What if it's specific? Before we keep going, there's another story I haven't been able to shake. It doesn't feel loud. It doesn't feel sudden. It feels stretched out, like something was happening for a long time and no one stopped it. A ranch out in California where boys didn't vanish all at once. Just one, and then another, with enough silence in between for people to question themselves instead of what was really happening. It's called the Wineville Chicken Coop Murders, and the part that stays with you is for how long it kept going. If you stayed the night in that house in Villisca, you wouldn't notice anything right away. That's the part people always say catches them off guard. It doesn't announce itself. There's no cold guest at the threshold, no figure in the doorway, none of those things you braced for when you drive in. The house just lets you in, lets you set down your bag, lets you stand in front of the room and listen to your own pulse slow back to normal and think, with something close to disappoint, This is just an old house. It wants you to think that. You move through the rooms with a lamp or a phone light, keeping your eyes on the solid, ordinary things. The worn threads on the stairs, the seams in the wallpaper, the cold iron of the bed frames that are still, even now, set up where the bed stood. The floor speaks under you. Every board has its own voice, and for a while, that's almost comforting, because at least you know what's making the sound. For a while, it really is just an old home carrying too much history. But the night is long in that house, and as it deepens, something shifts. Not in the house, in the silence. At some point, you notice how complete the quiet has become. Not the soft quiet of a sleeping house. Tighter than that. Pressurized. The kind of silence that has edges, that seems to be holding its own breath, waiting to see what you'll do with it. You become aware that you're being quiet back, that at some point, without deciding to, you stopped making noise. You're sitting very still. You're listening. And you don't entirely know why. Not yet. And that's when you hear it. A creak from somewhere above you. Old wood, you tell yourself. Houses settle. You know this. You let it go. But then it comes again. And this time, it isn't the house settling, because settling doesn't repeat itself on a count. This has spacing. This has intention. This carries weight. Is it the sound of a footstep on the floor above your head? In a room you walked through an hour ago and know is empty? Slow, deliberate. And then a pause, and then a second one in the direction of the stairs. Your body understands before your mind will let it. The skin along your arms tightens. Your breath goes shallow and quiet in its own, the way breath does when some old animal part of you has decided that being heard right now would be a mistake. You're not thinking about ghosts. You are thinking, something is moving up there, and it knows I'm down here. After that, the house is different, or you are. You can't tell which, and that not knowing is its own kind of dread. The hallway has changed. The dark at the far end has gotten deeper somehow. Not darker, deeper, like it's gained distance, like the end of the hall is farther away than the walls should allow. You find yourself staring into it, not because you saw something, because you're waiting for the part where you do, a shape that almost resolves, then doesn't. A suggestion of movement your eye catches and your mind refuses. You make yourself look away, and as you pass one of the rooms, the air changes against your face. Cold. A clean, sourceless cold. In a single pocket of space the size of a person. There's no window open, no vent, no reason. And you walk straight through the middle of it and feel it close all over your skin like water. You stop. You step back into it, and it's gone. The air is just air again, as if it had been standing there and then chose not to be. That's the moment it stops being an old house with a story. That's the moment you understand the house is responsive. that it's been aware of you the whole time, the way you have slowly become aware of it. That the two of you have been in the same room all night, and only one of you was surprised. By now, you've made a deal with yourself. You've stopped trying to explain things. You've stopped chasing the cold spots and the sounds. You've just decided, the way frightened people do, that you only have to last until morning. That if you stay still and stay small, the night will pass over you. So you sit and you go quiet and you wait it out, and that's when it finds you. It's almost always in the stillness, the instant your body finally lets go of some of the tension, the moment your guard drops half an inch. Your senses go sharp and clean, and the house chooses that to make its move. The quiet locks itself shut around you, so deafening that you can hear the blood in your own ears, your own breath, loud and ragged in a room that has none of its own. And then it isn't a sound at all. It's a feeling. Something eases closer, not a footstep. Closer than that, already past the door, already inside your space. A pressure that builds in the air beside you and settles there and stays. The way a person's presence fills a chair before they ever touch it. You feel the room get more crowded by exactly one, and then comes a part that breaks people. The cushion beside you indents. Not violently, not a slam, just a slow, soft compression, the unmistakable settle of weight easing down into the seat right next to you. The exact shift you'd feel if someone you loved had quietly sat down at your side in the dark. Except you're alone. You don't move. You can't. Every nerve in your body has collapsed down to the one spot 6 inches away, and your mind is screaming a single useless instruction. Don't turn your head. And then it happens again. A small adjustment, a settling. Like someone beside you shifting their weight to get comfortable. Like someone beside you deciding to stay a while. And that's when fear stops being something happening to the house. Because it isn't upstairs anymore. It's not down the hall. It's sitting next to you. And it's sat down on purpose. Some people, when they finally allow themselves to move, feel something else in the same instant. A hand. Light against the arm. Not a grab. Nothing you could fight or pull away from in time. Just contact. A brush of pressure across the skin. There and gone. Gentle in a way that is so much worse than violence would be. You jerk back. You look down at your own arm. Nothing's there. And it's the nothing that follows you home. Because it means the thing in that house didn't need to show itself to touch you. It doesn't need to be seen to be real. It can stand right at your shoulder, unseen, and reach out, put its hand on you, and let you feel that it could. There's a rhythm to it the longer you stay. You speak, and something answers. Not in words. A knock, a creak, a shift in another room, timed just a beat behind your voice. The way a reply lands a beat behind a question. You stand, and something moves elsewhere in the house. You try out loud to talk yourself out of it. It's the pipes, it's the wind, it's old wood, and something happens the instant you finish. fast and pointed, almost amused, almost like it heard you, almost like it wanted you to know it heard you. That's the realization that empties the warmth out of you. You're not being haunted, you're being answered. There's something in this house keeping pace with you, listening to your night the way you've been listening to its. And here's the part that pulls all of it into focus, the part that turns a long, frightening night into something far harder to put down. The people who've spent real time in that house over the years, strangers to another, believers and skeptics and people who only came on a dare, all tend to describe the same night, the same order of events, as if it's all working from a script and everyone who stays is just reading their way through it. It starts upstairs, then it comes down. First the steps overhead, then cold that moves, then the sounds, then the presence, nearer and heavier and more aware, until it's sitting beside you in the dark. Now hold that against what you already know, because the night the killer walked this house, he walked it exactly that direction. He started upstairs, the parents first, in their bed, then the children in the next room. Then he came down the stairs to the little room off the parlor where the Stillinger girls were sleeping. Upstairs first, then down, the same path, the same descent, the same order every time for over 100 years. This house doesn't behave like a place that's simply holding on to old energy. It behaves like a place that replays it, not where you can see it, not in any way you could ever put in front of a court or a camera, but in the dark, on the long nights, in the body of whoever happens to be sitting where the night can reach them. Something walks the same route it walked in 1912, not wandering, not lost, retracing, remembering. By the time the black outside of the windows finally starts to thin towards gray, most people aren't thinking about ghosts anymore. They're thinking about time. How long until the sun clears the rooftops? How long until the light reaches the glass? How long until this stops being a place where the dead keep their hours and goes back to being a house? And when they walk out into that cold morning light, they carry something out with them. Not a photo, not a sound on a recorder, heavier and harder to explain than either. The certainty that what happened to them in there wasn't random, it wasn't in their head, that it had a shape, it had a direction, that whatever moved through that house with them was already moving through it long before they arrived, and went right on moving after they left. Because if the house remembers, then what people feel inside it is an activity. It's not energy. It's not a trick of an old building in the dark. It's a reflection of a night that never actually ended. And maybe that's why the silence in that house feels the way it does. Why it sits so wrong on the skin. It's not the silence of an empty room. It's the silence of a room that's occupied, full, holding its breath, while something moves through it, step by step, waiting for the night to begin again. Here's the thing about unsolved cases. Most of them stay unsolved not because the evidence disappears, but because the people who could have read it are gone. Their witnesses aged out, the investigators move on, the moment that would have made the difference passes, and no one recognizes it while it's still in front of them. That's true of Villisca, but it's not the whole story. Because some physical evidence did survive. Fragments came out of that house, out of the chaos of the first contaminated morning, and ended up preserved in files and archives carried forward by people who refused to let the case go. Every so often across the past century, researchers have gone back to it. They re-examined the old material. They reread the old record with fresh eyes and better questions. And every time, they run into the same wall the original investigators hit. There simply isn't enough, intact enough, to put a single named person inside that house with absolute certainty. 100 years of degradation, a crime scene compromised within hours, a chain of custody that barely existed in the first place. There are people who believe the answer is still there somewhere, in a box of county files, in a detail no one has connected yet, in a thread that's never been pulled all the way through. They may be right. They may be wrong. What's certain is that no one has found it yet. The strongest case against Kelly was never really the confession, which fell apart almost as fast as he gave it. It was the letters. The correspondence he kept up with the investigators and newspapers in the years afterward unsettled the people who read it. There was a precision to some of it that seemed to reach past what had been printed publicly. Small details, the kind that don't obviously come from reading the papers, the kind that, to the people who studied them, felt like they came from having been there, whether that points to guilt or to the fragile and obsessive mind that had soaked up every available fact about the crime that destroyed his peace, is a question no trial ever cleanly answered. The strongest case for the traveling killer is simpler. It's the efficiency, the way this was carried out, contained, deliberate, finished without a single neighbor waking, without one scream reaching the street. Reads like the work of someone who'd done something like this before. Not necessarily the same crime, but the same terrible skill, moving through a house of sleeping people without waking a single one. Now that's not a thing you learn in Villisca, Iowa. That's the type of thing you carry in with you from somewhere else and carry back out. And the strongest case against Jones is the motive. Not just the business rivalry, though that was real and documented. It's the personal edge underneath it, the wounded pride, the rumored betrayal, the kind of grievance that festers in a small town where you pass the man who wronged you on the street every single day. Jones had the means and the standing to hire what he wanted done rather than do it himself, which would explain why no one in Villisca saw anything strange about any of the men they knew. Because maybe the man who walked into that house wasn't one of them at all. Maybe he was paid. Maybe he arrived on a train. Maybe he left the same way. And Jones stood in town the whole time, hands clean, alibi intact. Just a theory, not proof. But the kind that doesn't let go. We may never know, and that's the honest answer, and I think it's worth saying plainly. The conditions that would let us be certain: a surviving witness, an intact chain of evidence, a single document placing the right person in the right place at the right time. Those conditions may not exist anywhere anymore. What does exist is the house. And whatever the house holds, and the people who walk into it and walk back out carrying something they can't explain and dismiss, that's not nothing. It just isn't an answer. There's a version of the story that ends with the murders, the investigations, the suspects, the cold case. That version isn't wrong, but it leaves something out. Because what happened in Villisca in 1912 didn't only end 8 lives and open an unsolved case. It reshaped a community for generations. The families left behind, the Moores, the Stillingers, carrying this forward in ways that don't fit into a case file. Parents who buried children, siblings who grew up around an empty place at the table, extended families who had to rebuild some kind of life on top of a loss that came with no resolution attached to it. When there's no answer, when the question simply never closes, it moves differently through the people who have carried it. It has edges, and Villisca itself never fully set down the weight of that summer. For decades, the town was defined by something it never chose. The murders followed its own name into every newspaper, every introduction. Every time a stranger from somewhere else heard Villisca and knew exactly what it meant. Some of the residents resented that, the way an entire community got reduced to its single worst night, the way outsiders came looking for darkness in a place where people still lived, still worked, and still tried to simply be themselves. Others found a way to hold on to it differently, to make room for it, to accept what happened in that house was part of Villisca now, whether anybody wanted it to be or not, and that the only real question left was what the town chose to do with it. The decision to preserve the house and open it to the public was in part an answer to exactly that, a recognition that this history wasn't going to fade, and that it was better to hold it carefully, to tell it accurately, to keep the names of the people who died there attached to who they actually were, rather than let the story belong only to the people with no stake in getting it right. The house stands now as much as it stood then, restored, still, waiting. And the people of Villisca live alongside it the way communities have always lived alongside their histories, not without weight, but not without dignity either. And as we step away from that house, it's easy to believe the worst kind of darkness is the kind that arrives all at once. A single night, a single moment. Something you can point to and say, that's where everything changed. But the next story doesn't give you that. It doesn't arrive suddenly. It doesn't make a noise. It stretches. Out in a quiet part of California, there was a place that didn't look dangerous, a ranch that didn't stand out. Nothing about it warned you to stay away, and that's why it lasted as long as it did. Because the boys didn't disappear all at once, just one and then another, with enough time in between for people to doubt what they were seeing, for questions to fade before they turned into answers. It's known as the Wineville Chicken Coop murders, and what makes it different isn't just what was uncovered in the end, it's how long something was allowed to continue before anyone truly understood what they were looking at. If this story stayed with you, follow us at Chasing the Dark so you don't miss what comes next. And if you're listening somewhere that allows it, please leave a rating or a review. It really helps more than you think. Until next time, stay aware of the quiet, because sometimes it's not the silence, it's what you start noticing in it.
Mama!